Welcome to episode 60 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Our lives are on our computers and our phones. One day we may look back and decide that was a mistake, but for now, our finances, health records, communications, family photos, videos, our lives are on our computers. Now, there are several layers to keeping that information safe, from password practices to two-factor authentication to simply covering your screen. We've covered a lot of those on this show. We've also talked about the work of white hat hackers and other security experts. But there is this sort of middle layer that we want to hit today. The keepers of the app stores, which for people listening to this show pretty much means Apple. Today we're looking at Apple's app stores for macOS and iOS. Why do we have them? What's Apple watching for? And what happens when something bad gets through? Let's start with the App Store model for both iOS and the Mac. Apple runs stores. Developers apply to be in these stores. Then Apple takes 30% of the sales made through these stores. I guess the first question I have is this just a money play, or is this actually keeping us safe?
It's mostly a money play. There is a modicum of safety involved in that a developer has to pay $99 for their developer membership per year. Mm-hmm. The 30% itself, though, that's not really safety because of the fact that most of the malware actually that's made it through to the app stores has been free. So, 30% of free is still nothing. The developers aren't making any money in the app store because they're making their money through stealing people's accounts and doing whatever. So in that regard, and even so, like the $99 fee, when somebody gets busted doing something bad and they get their license revoked, they just get another name and make another account. And $99 really isn't that much of a threshold as far as barriers go. So in that regard, from a safety side of things, no.
But, I mean, from the business side of things, if you were just selling apps on the App Store and you didn't have to have a merchant account to process credit cards or deal with chargebacks, things like that, 30% is probably a good number. I mean, depending on how many chargebacks you have and the percentages that you have worked out with your bank, and all the other tiers in there. I mean, from product activations, if you do that with licensing, Apple also manages that as well. So when you kind of equate it there, 30% isn't too bad. And they make it easy.
That's the thing, is they make it really easy. And as a developer, when you're thinking about things like license keys and activations and making sure your app doesn't get pirated to oblivion, it takes up a lot of time, and you might not think of it at the time, but it also that takes up money for your company if you're spending hours and hours and hours developing mechanisms to protect your app from piracy or what have you, and you're not developing core components of your app, the features that you just want to pay for. So Apple does make that really an attractive feature of the app stores, just because you don't have to worry about that. And what Nick just mentioned with things like merchant accounts and chargebacks, there are a lot of e-commerce vendors out there these days that will do a lot of that for you, and they take their cuts, and you're still adding another layer, somebody else's either code or interaction with their services to make things work correctly with your app. So, cutting that kind of stuff out and just going straight through an app store can save developers a lot of time. And then it's kind of up to a developer. Is that 30% worth it to them for what they're gaining and what they're saving?
Well, it's interesting. You say it's up to the developer, but I mean, it's only up to the Mac developer.
Yes.
I mean, if you're wanting to run a third-party application on your iPhone, you're going to have to jailbreak. And of course, we've talked about jailbreaking in the past on this show, whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea. Spoiler. It's generally speaking not necessarily the best idea, because it's not 2008 anymore. It was 2008, right? No, 2007. It's not 2007 anymore. 2008 is when the App Store came along, and as it filled up, there became less and less reason for most people to jailbreak their iPhone, or a less and less legitimate reason anyway. I guess one of the things I'm wondering about, actually, jailbreaking does allow people to run non-sanctioned apps for iOS. Jailbreaking is not required for the Mac. Now, I think we've gone through before the different layers of being able to run apps on a Mac before. Do you guys want to hit those again? I mean, there's Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear in a way, right? I mean, there's like totally locked down, so you can't download any apps to your Mac except for apps that come from the Mac App Store. There's a sort of a middle of the road where you are going to be asked basically, are you sure? Are you really sure? And then there's just a Katie bar the door. Everybody can get in. You can run whatever you want to anytime you want to. I mean, do I have those? I know I don't have the names right, but are those basically the layers?
The second one is actually App Store apps or third-party apps signed by a valid developer ID account. So somebody who's a part of the developer program, you can still get a certificate from Apple, code sign your app. Apple could still revoke the certificate if you do bad stuff and you're caught. And you're still paying your $99 to them every year, but you don't have to go through the review process for the Mac App Store in order to sell your app. And I think that's the default, actually, is still allow Mac App Store apps and third-party apps that are developer program apps. And that's the best for most people.
Can you talk to me? I mean, forgive me, I don't know if you actually know or if you would be guessing, but your guess would be educated. I mean, what's the point of Apple saying, okay, you don't want to be in our app store, that's fine, but go ahead and pay us anyway, and then we'll tell people that you're cool, as far as we know. I mean, why would Apple... I mean, if they can do that on the Mac, they could do that on iOS as well. Allow me to download an application for my phone that doesn't come from the App Store. I guess what I'm wondering is, why are those two models different? Or why is Apple willing to look at things for the Mac and say, yeah, we're fine not dealing with that. Let somebody else handle that. You keep all the money except for the $99 you're giving us. Why are those two models different?
It kind of comes down to the security of the operating system in question. iOS, the iOS platform itself is really secure. It's very locked down. There's been very few public security incidences with it. It's really rock solid security overall. macOS you have more access to the computer. It's much easier to do stuff or to get stuff to misbehave, and that's kind of a legacy issue. You've had all these years where there was no app store and developers would just create their apps using, Apple's API and basically make their code work on a Mac and then sell it however they wanted, on a CD or in a store or online. And for Apple to kind of have an existing platform and say, oh, from this version of macOS onwards, nobody can release an app unless it goes through the App Store. It would have been a rebellion amongst Mac app developers and probably been a mass exodus from the platform. You can't just kind of dump that on developers or users overnight. People would not be happy. Whether or not Apple's going to be moving more towards a locked down system, locking down Mac OS and making it more and more like iOS, that seems to be the general trend as the years have progressed. And I think it's more of an issue of when you have a secure app development, a distribution platform, so the App Store or on iOS or macOS, there are certain limitations that are necessary for apps that want to be, that they, if you want to sell it through the store, you have to follow their rules. And that is from a security perspective. And that's also problematic for some Mac developers because they're, hey, I want my app to do XYZ and I can't make it do that if I want to follow your rules to get in the App Store. And again, they don't want to alienate, these core developers. So that's kind of a middle of the road option, at least for the time being.
One thing that I also noticed changed in High Sierra, under the security and privacy settings, you mentioned the whole A, B, or C choices to run apps downloaded from either the App Store, and identified developers. There used to be a third option in there. Now there's only two options. The third option would say anywhere.
Yeah, they took that away, didn't they?
Yep, it's taken away in there. I mean, they still let you do it, but they give you the warnings for it. And it's not just blatantly allow from anywhere.
Really?
I think in I want to say it was in Sierra, actually, where they started doing it, where you could set it to allow from anywhere, but it would switch back after 2 weeks or 30 days or something like that, basically to avoid a situation where somebody who had access to your computer or somebody tricked you into changing the setting, that it would kind of limit the time window available where a bad guy could get you to download and run their hacker code. I believe I want to say that was in Sierra where they changed that to kind of a default, switches back to a more secure setting after a set number of days.
Let me ask you, I want to ask you guys one question, but from a couple of different angles. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on applications for the Mac that come from outside the Mac App Store. And I guess I want to ask you about them both. Well, as you just said, there are some things that people, like legitimate things that people want to do with applications for the Mac that they can no longer do if they're going to sell in the Mac App Store. And so I guess the two things I'm wondering are, first of all, like, do you advise people get all of your apps from the Mac App Store? Do you advise people get most of your apps from the Mac App Store? And I'm asking that from a security standpoint. But then I want to ask you about, okay, so I have an app that I want to sell, but I can't sell it through the App Store. I mean, what is that? First of all, why wouldn't you be able to? And then, what sort of changes has that wrought for like business models and things like that? But let's start with the first one. Somebody comes to you and says, hey, I found this, I don't know, word processing app or something else, and it's outside the Mac App Store, and I don't know much about it, but it's a good price, and it looks like it would be good. I mean, do you, generally speaking, suggest that people go through the Mac App Store? Does that keep you secure? Or, well, I mean, I guess talk to me about that first.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. The security-wise, you're perfectly fine buying something from outside of the Mac App Store if it's from a trusted company. Like, if you know the company, if you've been using their products for years, or if they're really well known, it's a pretty safe bet that you can get their app and not have to worry. If it's some random tiny little new app and it has no exposure and the website looks a little shady, even if the website doesn't look shady, I shouldn't call it like that. It could look really slick. You do some research. Kind of figure out if the app's been around for a while, and if you know any other Mac users who are actually using it on their computers, not just trusting the testimonials listed on the website. The benefit of getting something directly from the Mac App Store is, it's at least gotten through some of Apple's checks there. And also when it comes to stuff like updates, program updates, macOS does that automatically. It keeps your apps up to date, keeps the operating system up to date. I should say your Mac App Store apps. And that's really important because when security flaws are found and developers become aware of them, they will usually patch their apps to secure the problem. And if you have a third-party app and you don't have it configured to check automatically for updates, or you don't run it very often, you might not remember to make sure you're running the latest version that has the security patches. And additionally, we've seen situations where recently with, I believe, some of the torrent programs that had their servers hacked, their distribution servers for updates. So any user who updated, it's a third-party app outside the Mac App Store, and any user who downloaded an update within a certain time frame was getting something controlled by bad guys. When you have an App Store app, that distribution server is Apple. And we trust that Apple keeps their distribution servers more secure than you'd expect maybe with a smaller company, a third-party company. So that's definitely a case where the Mac App Store has some significant benefits over third party. I would say if there's nothing wrong with going third party if you trust the company, if you know the company, but we'd always recommend that you go with a company that's actually paid the $99 for the certificate, because if something is found to be wrong with that program, Apple has the capability to stop that program from running on your Mac. And I know that sounds kind of Orwellian, but it's really good in the case of security situations. If you're getting that app that isn't code signed at all, that nobody, they didn't pay Apple the $99 developer program fee for, Apple doesn't have any real easy way of stopping that app from running on your Mac, even if it's found to be doing something bad. I mean, they have some security stuff they can do in the background, but for the most part, if you're going with either the App Store itself or with a Apple developer program third-party app, there's some extra safety nets in place that will protect you if it turns out that something bad is going on that Apple becomes aware of.
Okay, I want to come back to the business question that I had in just a moment, but you mentioned a couple of times that Apple is sort of checking things from a security standpoint. I believe that we've talked in the past about, it's probably not true for the Mac. With the Mac, I would assume that they give it a little bit more, that they're able to look at things more closely because they're receiving fewer Mac apps. But like for iOS, it feels like a lot of the times what the App Store is doing is just basically running it and making sure it's not crashing. I mean, and they might also be looking for something like egregious violation of TOS, of the terms of service. But they're not running like necessarily as hardcore a look at the code, maybe. I guess what I'm wondering is when developers submit their apps to be in the App Store, both the Mac App Store and the iOS App Store, I mean, are they actually running like a hard target security, like sweep and search and double check and triple check? Or are they just like, okay, these people have paid the $99. This is not crashing the machine. Let's get it out there. I mean, what's Apple looking for when they actually review an application?
They don't really give all the details. They'll say that they check for stuff like crashing, first and foremost. Making sure the app actually does something is, I believe, a newer term of service. They don't want fake apps or prank apps as much, but mostly it's to check that they're not crashing and that they're not using Apple's private system calls, doing stuff they shouldn't be doing. Some apps end up getting a closer look, but it seems almost arbitrary. You'll sometimes see developers posting on Twitter saying, my app's been in review for 47 days, what's going on? And sometimes it seems like some apps get stuck in limbo for no real apparent reason, while other apps clear within an hour of the review starting. So I don't actually know that they give more attention to the Mac side of things than iOS. A lot of it is automated. I think the amount of time that actually spends in front of a real reviewer with the number of app submissions they get every single day is not very long at all. Apple will, of course, go back and re-review something if they start getting a lot of reports that an app is doing something it shouldn't be doing. But that's almost an after-the-fact type thing, which is when their power to revoke a certificate and stop an app from running comes into play.
But just because it's automated doesn't necessarily mean that it's lacking anything less that a human could do, right? I mean, there's a lot of checks that you could do for crashes or even being able to take advantage and exploit things. You build that into your automation right there, yeah?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk in a few minutes about what happens when something bad actually gets past the checks, be those automated or by humans, into both the Mac App Store and iOS App Store. But I don't want to forget about the business angle of things. You guys sell apps for the Mac that aren't in the App Store. I'm curious, can you talk about, and do you want to talk about, how the Mac App Store has sort of changed things for you and your business over the years?
Totally. So when Apple introduced the App Store, they also shut down the download page on their site. And for many Mac developers out there who hadn't switched over to the App Store model, when they shut that down, it was... Give me some awesome relation to put there.
Let's say decimation. Do you want to say decimation? Do you want to say it led to hard times?
Decimation, yeah. But yeah, for a lot of the smaller folks out there, when you're getting majority of your traffic from one link, from one source, if it's Apple per se, or if you're getting all your traffic from Google and the search engine results change. This was in the Mac industry one of the big changes that affected a lot of folks, us included, because we didn't have the app in the Mac App Store for Mac Scan, and for reasons not because we didn't want to be included or because we didn't want to give up 30% or anything like that. It was technical wise, some of the limitations, and we could talk about that more later. But as far as the business aspect went, it definitely, you saw a lot of Mac developers going, wait, what just happened? Where did this website go? And is it coming back at all? Maybe.
Well, it's part of sort of the Mac growing up as a platform, right? I mean, we had There were very lean times for the Mac. I'm sure anybody who's been a Mac user for a long time, they remember that. And so, that's why we had one of the reasons the Mac user groups survived as long as they did, because there were so few people and they were passionate about their operating system. They were passionate about their computer. And now the Mac is a computer. It's a highly sought after computer. It's the best selling computer out there. And there's been sort of I don't want to say the Mac has grown up, but it's changed certainly a lot. And part of that is, no, there's not going to be a free download store anymore, because you're dealing with a real computer, you're dealing with a real operating system, you're dealing with a real business. And so let's do business instead of, hey, let's all be groovy.
Yeah. Well, and we've seen different websites come and go. Like Version Tracker was another one that Mac developers were constantly submitting all their version updates to, reading everybody's comments. And now we have,
Mac
what do we
Update.
have left? Mac Update's probably the biggest one out there right now.
For Mac users, yeah. There's other sites that that keep track of Mac stuff. Some of them are only checking the App Store, and the links only go to the App Store. Some of them allow third-party submissions, and it's just the Mac is almost an afterthought on those. They also do Windows software and Android. So I think Mac Update is the only real Mac-specific one that's still around at this time.
So talk to me then about going back inside the app stores. Theoretically, a part of what's happening when you purchase an app through iOS or from macOS is, you're getting a level of security. As you pointed out earlier, you do have Apple behind it. If it's a signed certificate, then Apple is actually able to stop it. Apple, of course, can then certainly theoretically anyway do something about that particular developer, because theoretically they've got a line on who that is. But bad things do get through. And I guess what I'm wondering is, how do we find out, first of all, when something bad does get through the gate? Is that some security researcher somewhere who sees something hinky? Is that users saying, hey, what the heck, I didn't log into this, account, and suddenly this account's active? What is it that lets us know something's gone wrong?
It's generally been, at this point, it is a security researcher either stumbling across the ratings and reviews for an app, or they download an app themselves and say, hey, this seems to be doing something funny. There's been a trend lately towards more wide-scale analysis, at least with iOS apps, to kind of figure out what the apps are doing, where they're calling home to. And there's some sites out there. We've talked about the Verify.ly service before, and that's more for professionals or organizations that are looking to vet apps that they'd be using internally. But there are also a lot of times when we have seen bad stuff that's made it through Apple's review process, you end up seeing a lot of one-star reviews for the app, and a lot of users saying, hey, I'm suddenly getting ads, or hey, I got locked out of my Instagram account. Hey, somebody took over my account and started posting stuff. And it's almost one of those, when you look as a security professional, you go, wow, how did nobody notice this beforehand? There's 50 one-star reviews here in the past 2 months that this app's been really misbehaving. And it kind of goes to show that Apple's not really paying attention to the reviews section on the site. They only recently started allowing developers to actually respond to reviews in line. So a user posts a review and a developer can actually respond back saying, hey, here's a fix for that problem you encountered, or hey, we're going to fix that bug, or hey, you're using it wrong. But the fact of the matter is, until the right person becomes aware of the issue, nothing really happens, is the unfortunate truth. It usually takes somebody a little more prominent, either in the security industry or who has a contact in Apple, or somebody who works at Apple themselves finds something misbehaving. It almost takes a certain level there before you'll see action being taken. You can have lots of bad reviews from users, and that's not going to be enough if nobody is kind of ringing the alarms and saying, hey, Apple, you've got something bad in the App Store.
Exactly. And Apple has email addresses for their security teams and those different contacts there. So versus it just being a one-star review going, this app sucks, turning it into, wait, this app is probably doing something it shouldn't be doing, and then getting looked at a lot quicker.
And there's another hurdle there, is that in the past, when we've actually helped other people get in touch with Apple security to report issues, there's a general security email address for Apple to report a security issue. And that's kind of it casts a wide net. I mean, if you post an email address publicly on the web, you get lots of spam, but you also get lots of people either asking for completely unrelated support with the app, or they think they have an issue and they actually don't, or, so the real problems can actually kind of get lost in the shuffle when you're talking about the volume of email that's getting through. So it's almost like you have to have that internal contact at the company or somebody you can reach out to on social media to get the ball rolling more quickly. Which Apple's very, very quick to act once they become aware of an app that's misbehaving. In our experience in the past, when we've actually alerted Apple to bad apps, we've seen them taken down within 20 or 30 minutes of sending that email to Apple saying, hey, you've got a problem. But at the same time, you'll have lots of situations where after the fact, you realize an app has been sitting there for 2 months in the App Store and nobody noticed. I mean, that's, Apple didn't notice, security researchers didn't notice, users might have noticed and, were posting those bad reviews, but nobody bothered, taking that extra step to get the ball rolling and contact Apple until a certain amount of time had passed.
What's strange, actually, is I know as a podcaster, if you go into the different podcast descriptions, I want to say even down to the individual ratings, there is a little thing where you can click and you can report a concern. Mm-hmm. But now with the changes in the App Store for iOS and iOS 11, and with the elimination of the App Store in iTunes, I while you were just talking, I was looking for, is there a report a concern button like for individual apps or specific apps? And if there is one, it's so hidden there may as well not be a button.
Yeah, I believe the report of concern is mainly, if you need to report somebody who's harmful or abusive language in their review, or for a developer who's saying, hey, this isn't even my app they're reviewing here, stuff like that. I think, I'm trying to think now if I've seen any quick and easy way to report an app on an actual per app basis, and I still think it's almost down to linking, just providing the actual App Store link to Apple when reporting those issues.
So then talk to me about, so a security researcher finds something wrong. This is not the bug bounty program, right? I mean, no. If you as a developer find something wrong with a particular application and you're able to find a way to let Apple know about it, that's not part of the whole bug thing. I mean, the bug bounties that Apple has put out actually just have to do with their own operating systems, right? The one for the Mac and the one for iOS.
Exactly. It's the bug bounty program is strictly for Apple generated code. When you're talking about third party code, it's on if it's a bug, it's an unintentional security issue, that's on a user or whoever to report to that company and have them fix it. If it's a app that is intentionally misbehaving, that's still on somebody to report to Apple to have it yanked from the App Store. It's the bug bounty program is strictly for Apple to become aware of their own problems.
And that's for both the Mac operating system, or just for iOS, or for which? I'm sorry, for both Mac OS and iOS, or just for one or the other?
As far as I'm aware, at this time, it's only iOS that they are paying bug bounties on. They are not currently extending that to cover Mac OS bugs.
Huh.
And it is,
okay.
It's an invite only program. So I can't speak from direct experience there. But people I've talked to have said that is the case. It's iOS only at this time, invite only. I guess if you had a really, really awesome, and I say awesome in terms of a really horrible bug that you found in iOS, and you emailed Apple out of the blue, yeah, you'd probably get inducted into their secret club. But at the same time, it's not the same type of bug bounty program that you see at other large companies like Google and Microsoft, where anybody can participate regardless of their status in the security industry.
I guess it sort of makes sense that it would only be about their operating system and not about third-party apps, because what would stop an enterprising individual from writing a third-party app, submitting it, hiding a bug, and then going back to Apple and saying, hey, there's a bug in this thing. I mean, you'd have to run like some sort of double blind something or other, but I mean, basically, I mean, you could just set up your own extortion ring in your spare time.
Hey, stop giving people ideas.
Well, that's why they don't do it that way. But yeah, they're only concerned, they're concerned more about, okay, could this bug take over everybody's iPhones, or could this bug be used by a nation state to, spy on dissidents? Could this be used to do yada, yada, yada? And they're trying to avoid those kind of situations. When you have somebody who's intentionally programming a bug into an app or, something bad with the intention to exploit it for gain, it's a whole different ballgame. I don't really know of any of the bug bounty programs out there that are made for third-party apps in that regard. Some of the, I should take that back actually, some of the kind of gray market bug bounty programs out there that are run by third-party companies that will in turn sell bugs to other third parties or governments or police or whoever, you don't know, they sometimes accept bug bounties that are for major third-party apps, things that have millions and millions and millions of users. Mostly it's the web browsers, the operating systems, that kind of stuff. But that's the one situation I can think of. If you're talking about a company running a bug bounty program, a company like Google or Apple, it's going to be for their own products and not anything else.
Do you suppose that the reason that Apple only runs the bug bounty, and I'm asking you to guess, I know you don't have any inside knowledge or information, or at least I don't think you do. But do you suppose the reason that Apple runs the bug bounty program pays actually for iOS vulnerabilities as opposed to macOS vulnerabilities? I mean, does that have to do with the sheer numbers of people using iOS at this point? Does it have to do with Apple wanting to make sure that the iOS thing, I mean, to use Steve Jobs' term, that it just works? Or is it because we expect our computers to be able to do more and so we can't lock them down as much? I mean, if we lock down, I would think if we lock down development for the Mac the same way they've locked down development for iOS, our computers would become much less useful to us, at least today. I mean, it almost sounds like they're leaving the Mac by the side of the road with a note saying, "Please look after this machine." And yet, at the same time, if they locked it down as much, then I would have a much less useful machine. It seems.
Exactly, and I think it's kind of the conundrum. I don't honestly know why they wouldn't want to at least have some sort of program for the Mac. I mean, it doesn't even have to pay out as much as iOS because it's a smaller market share. Right now, developers are still freely submitting bugs that they find in macOS to Apple or publicly disclosing them. With iOS, almost from the start, the bugs that were found, at least as far as jailbreaks go, were pretty closely guarded secrets. Jailbreaking, the crews that would supply the jailbreaks, some of them did it for money. Some of them did it, they were, way in the early days, it was kind of altruistic, but then it became, a jailbreak was worth a lot of money. And so that could be more of the reason why they're only worrying about iOS right now, is that if they're not taking a bug bounty or offering a bug bounty for iOS bugs, those bugs are going to be sold to somebody else and Apple won't have the information, without potentially paying another third party for it. So that could be part of the reason, is that right now Mac OS bugs aren't viewed as nearly as valuable as iOS ones are. So Apple's going to want those for themselves so they can fix them without commanding as high of a price on the gray market or black market. I guess priority and probably workplace limitations, politics, schedules, all that stuff probably plays a role into why there isn't a similar program for the Mac.
But I don't know. We, have seen able to run apps from App Store identified developer, and everywhere just disappeared from there. So maybe part of their pathway is going down into making it a much more lockdown system. I'm just guessing. I
didn't want to say it for fear that it would come true. I didn't want to jinx it. Yeah, that's the other thing, is that we have seen, it's been actually a lot more gradual than I think many of us expected, but it's been a gradual hardening of the operating system, becoming more and more, I guess, user-friendly in the sense that there are less options for users. Power users aren't happy, but the operating system is becoming more secure at the cost of some of the capabilities of the machine. And the question is when or if iOS and macOS are going to kind of converge at some point in the future. I know they've said, no, it's not. It doesn't make sense on desktops. Are we going to see some sort of hybrid in the future? And that could be another reason, is if they've got plans to lock down the operating system even more, it might be less of a reason to bother setting up a program. Although from a security researcher standpoint, it just seems like it's a no-brainer. I mean, if you've already got it running for iOS, just open it up to macOS as well. You've probably got a lot of overlapping code anyway, for a lot of the underlying systems. So,
but maybe there's something in the business side of things, because, the underlying system in it and all the different bits and pieces of code, and so many things affected there, how you access from the outside, from, different websites and everything that you're doing on it, versus iOS, much more limited. So they have much more control of it. Mm-hmm. So from the business side of things, they'd probably be paying out a lot more money for the macOS side of things than iOS. No?
No, I think iOS is a lot more hardened than macOS. So yeah, they probably pay out relatively few bounties for iOS compared to, just because there aren't as many bugs. With macOS, yeah, I don't know, maybe that plays a role. Who knows?
We're actually going to be talking in the coming weeks about malware and the App Store, and a harder look at how Apple gets alerted to security issues. In the meantime, if you want to go back and check out some of the notes for this episode, we do have a website to do that. It is securemac.com/checklist. Again, that is securemac.com/checklist. I also alluded at the beginning of the show to all the different ways that we've talked about for you to keep yourself safe. I mean, this was just sort of a view from 30,000 feet, how Apple is working in some cases to keep users safe as well. But if you want to go back and check out some of the stuff that we were talking about, password do's and don'ts, VPNs, how to use them, when to use them, why to use them. I mean, all sorts of security stuff that we've been covering over the past year. Again, the address to do that is securemac.com/checklist. If you have any questions of your own, if you have any topics you'd like to hear us hit, or just any comments you want to share, we do have an email address. It is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.